Celestial Islands continent. Seen from 10,000 light-years away, there is a disk, composed of the mist and dust moving slowly. The diameter of the disk is about 300,000 light-years. The mists are the flowing Heaven River, and the dusts are the planets in the Heaven River. These planets have the similar size with the Earth. They float in the Heaven River just like the sea islands. The total number of these planets is 80 billion, on 30 billion of which live one Buddha, or the celestial being. That's why it is called the Celestial Islands continent. On the Celestial Islands continent, there are 80 billion islands, and each has a name. The Buddha living on these islands have their own names too. Apart from the 30 billion islands resided by the celestial beings, the other 50 billion islands are still yet to be resided, waiting for the people upgraded into the Buddha from the mortal world, 1,000-year world, and 10,000-year world. Now let's have a look at the Snow Peak Island. On this island, there is a peak with 10 levels. The first level is in the amber color. The second level is in the green color. The third level is in gold. Level 4 to level 10 is in light blue, gray, milk white, purple, red, black, and snow white respectively. Because the top level is shining in snow white, it is called the Snow Peak Mount. On the Snow Peak Island lives a fairy, Buddha, called Yue. One day she succeeded in practicing a fantastic spell and invited some celestial beings to appreciate it. We know that this island is nothing special except the Snow Peak. On the vast, empty and dry land, there is no animal, plant, or human. It is a lonely island producing nothing but loneliness. Then this day, a common stone at the foot of the Snow Peak moved a little bit and changed into an extremely charming lady, who was Yue celestial being, the owner of the Snow Peak Island. She stood up straight and then sat down with her legs crossed. The illuminating fireballs flew from her head and into the sky. We followed one of these fireballs and saw it flying across the vast Heaven River and sea and reaching the Coral Castle Island. It got into the brain of a dolphin which was resting on the beach. The dolphin swung a little bit and changed into a handsome young man, who was called Dolphin Celestial Body, the owner of the Coral Castle Island. He touched her head, smiled, and waved to the sea. Then the waves became violent, and a flying horse with wings flew from the waves. Dolphin Celestial Being got on the horse and flew towards the Snow Peak Island. On his way, he met the Green Island Flute Buddha riding on a black cow, the Flower Fairy sitting on a lotus from the Flowers Island, the Crane Celestial Being riding on a crane from the Thousand Birds Island, the White Man Buddha riding on a 9-head beast from the 10,000 Beasts Island, and the Gold Wheel Celestial Being riding on the Fire Wind Wheel from the Fire and Wind Island, who were also on their journey to the Snow Peak Island. When they were about to reach the island, they saw thousands of celestial beings in the sky. Some of them were riding the fish, some on the peacock, some on a pinholder, some on a blanket, some on a dog sledge, some on a big leaf, some on the arch bridge made of hundreds of birds, some on the clouds, some on tornado, and some on comet with tails. When reaching the Snow Peak Island, they all descended to the ground and their transport became the colorful cloth on their bodies or walking sticks in their hands. These Buddha and celestial beings have weird appearances. Some are dwarfs, some are tall and strong, some are handsome, some are ugly, some have cold eyes, some have long ears stretching to the shoulders, some have the face of kids but white hair, some have beards touching the ground, some have 3 eyes, some have 18 hands, some have bald heads, and some talk like 6-year-old kids. But the lady celestial beings are pretty and fascinating. On the empty land of the island, there were thousands of celestial beings saying hello to each other. Then all of them turned to Yue celestial being to congratulate her on another spell. When everybody was talking happily, a thunder-like voice came from the crowd. "Sister Yue, we are all your guests. Do the guests have to stand on the wild field like this?" The celestial beings traced the voice and saw a celestial being waving to Yue. He was more than 2 meters tall with rough black hair, red face, and large head. He was the Red Face Buddha, the owner of Black Canyon Island. Yue smiled and said, "Please." She spread her long right sleeve in the air, and there appeared a palace made of red bricks and green tiles in front of them. In the palace, there were many buildings and pavilions connected by dozens of meters of corridors. The celestial beings were amazed and voiced their admiration. Then Yue celestial being spread her left sleeve into the sky and said, "Please." Suddenly more than 1,000 kinds of grass, plants and trees such as the bamboo, pear trees, willows, pine trees, berry trees, and redwood grow beside the pavilions and buildings and on the wild fields in the palace. The trees and plants swing in the breeze and give out fragrance. The fruit hangs on the trees. The celestial beings cheered again for the wonder. Then a skinny celestial being with only one eye on the forehead said, "Sister Yui, what do you plan to place in the open space?" Yui giggled and gave a wave into the air with her two hands. There appeared a pond in the space. In the middle of the pond there was an artificial hill with water rushing out of the top. The fragrant lotus, swimming swans and mandarin ducks, the jumping goldfish and frogs made scene attractive. Another round of cheers came. Then a barefoot Buddha with big belly and mouth said loudly, "Sister Yui, your spells are excellent. But would you like to serve us something to eat, because we have traveled far to your island?" When saying this, he touched his big belly protruding out of his clothes. The other celestial beings also agreed with him and looked at Yui's celestial being. Yui gave another smile and jumped on the cloud 10 meters above the ground. She extended her right hand with 5 fingers stretched and pointed to the peach tree beside her. The peaches in the tree were all absorbed into her hands. She closed her hands, threw out the peaches suddenly and said, "Please have a look." The peaches rolled into the crowd and grew larger, turning the delicate and old-fashioned square table and backrest chairs. The celestial beings took their seats happily. Then Yui said loudly, "Attention, please." She blew a mouth of celestial mist covering a pear tree. Moments later, the mist disappeared and the pears began to drop onto the ground, turning into the pretty fairies in colorful silk cloth. Holding fruit plates with strange fruit in their hands, the fairies came to the tables and settled the fruit plates, saying to the celestial beings gently, "Please." Then they turned and stood behind the celestial beings. Before the celestial beings ate the fruit, Yui said loudly for another time, "Please look." She bowed to the pond and clapped her hands. The frogs in the ponds jumped out and turned into the handsome young men in black, holding the long-mouthed kettle made of the glazed pagoda and amber luminous cups. These young men walked to the tables and poured the wine in the kettle into the luminous cups. The wine shines in the cups with fragrance. The celestial beings admired. "This is the most fragrant wine I have ever smelled, excellent," or "My heart is drunk." Yui, holding one cup in her hand, said, "It is my great honor to have your presence on my island. The wine is specially prepared for my distinguished guests. Cheers." The celestial beings were about to drink when they saw the spiritual light ripples in the cup. At the bottom of the cups something special appeared. Some cups had the swimming goldfish. Some had the little dragon flying. Some had small tortoise moving. Some had seahorse running. Some had starless fish moving. Some had pearl shining. Almost all the sea fish and animals could be seen in the cups. The celestial beings understood that these are the miraculous drug given by Yui. The celestial beings laughed or said thanks to Yui. They raised their cups and drank the wine. The waiters filled their cups again, and the celestial beings drank for another round of cheers. When they were enjoying themselves, a celestial being said loudly, "Yui, we know your spells have almost reached the peak, but can you show something more to us?" The celestial beings followed the voice and saw 8 elderly celestial beings sitting under the grape trees. One of them was a kindly-looking and bald-headed one with long white hair and dragon-head stick. He waved hands to the celestial beings. He was the highly respected empty Buddha from the Infinitude Island in the Elysium world. Out of respect, the celestial beings put down their cups and became quiet. A kid celestial being asked the eagle-nosed celestial being beside him, "You don't know him because you have just come from the 10,000-year world after self-refinery. He is most of the most competent celestial beings in the Celestial Islands continent. His has multiple and wonderful spells. In his eyes, the spells of Yui are just the games of the kids. Keep quiet and let's see." Yui celestial being, with her hands together, bowed to the empty celestial being and said, "Master Empty, hope you can enjoy my trivial spells." She then shouted to the pond, "Kids, it's time for you to give the dance." Suddenly, the ducks in the pond jumped to the air and became musicians. Some played pipa, some played flute, some played bamboo flute, Some played violin, some played drum, and some played hammer. At the same time, the swans in the pond also flew to the cloud and turned into the pretty fairies. In a short moment, the fascinating music began to echo in the air. The fairies began to dance and show their youthful energy and sexy posture. The celestial beings laughed happily. The performance lasted for about 1 hour. Then the fairies and players went back to the pond in the form of swans and ducks. When the celestial beings had enjoyed themselves, they stood up. An elderly lady celestial being, with purple hair on the head, gave a Zen posture, with her palms together, and said to Yui's sister, "Thank you for your hospitality. I want to go back home now because I have to handle some business on my island." The other celestial beings also said, "We will have to leave now. Thank you for much. Next time I will host you on my Sufficient Treasures Island. See you next time." Then they all rode on their animal vehicles and flew in the sky. Celestial being Yui bade farewell respectfully with her hands joined, looking up in the sky and said, "Thank you for your presence on the Snow Peak Island." When all the celestial beings were not seen in the sky, she waved her right hands and left hands, gave a Zen posture with her palms staying together, and gave out a mouthful of white mist. Suddenly all the buildings, pavilions, trees, flowers, grass, mandarin ducks, and ducks all disappeared. The land returned to the wilderness. She was then transformed into a golden ray, which merged in the snow peak immediately.